Hey guys. So today we're going to be talking about something near and dear to my heart. Primus. You guys don't want to hear? Okay, I'll just stop talking about Primus. Okay, I'll talk a little bit about Primus. One person asked if I could detail a little bit more information about the organizations that exist within Primus, or more accurately within Dareth, the primary continent. Now, I have a list here, which is going to be looking down the list. I'm not going to be covering all the nations. That's really a completely separate thing, and really each nation would probably be its own video. As usual, if you have any further questions, please feel free to put them in the comments below. So, let's start with the organization that thus far has seen the most on-screen time. Now, all these organizations are pretty large scale. We're talking companies, groups, guilds, etc. that are fairly well known on a continental level. I'm not going to be listing every dinky little organization, even though some of them have actually had on-screen time, like the organization that was doing the research down in the show area that was then wiped out after the party went through there, or the major criminal organizations that is within the show area that have resisted the undermarket for years and years. No, none of that. We're just going to be talking about the really big stuff, like Country Rider. Now, Country Rider is actually the postal service. Now, once upon a time, there was a kind of a joint effort across all of the nations. Well, three of the nations, because this was back when Alluvia wasn't formed yet, to just kind of share the load for packages, for letters, in order to facilitate communication. And of course, the countries, the nations involved, basically got to ship things for free for all intents and purposes. But of course, it wasn't actually free because they were the ones funding the organization functioning in the first place. Somewhat more recently, let's see, I think I have the number here. There was... Yeah, here we go. The about 34 years ago, prior to now, looks like, right around the Dry Reach incident, a fairly large number of wealthy individuals from amongst the show, the Navari, and Alluvia all got together and said, "We'll go ahead and take this off your hands," and took the postal service from the government and reformed it into what we know as the Country Rider now. The Country Rider basically are the only method of transportation for packages, for letters and whatnot, that exists in the entire continent, unless you want to literally walk up to someone and pay them and say, "Please take this to this person at this location and please go." That is, of course, a thing that still happens, usually very rarely, or if you're sending, like, your own messenger, messengers still exist and whatnot. But for the most part, if you want to send a letter or a package or anything like that, it goes through Country Rider. They have a very effective monopoly on things. Country Rider also has a long-standing contract with, well, with the Osteth, actually, although not many people are aware of that, with the Mites. Now, if you've paid attention, I've mentioned the Mites don't actually exist as a concrete organization, but the Mites that run the hub are, and the Country Rider has long since had a deal with them to allow Country Rider more or less free, constant access for any Country Rider employee to the hub, pretty much any time of day, 24/7, etc. Now, that has cost them a decent amount of, well, not money, because the Mites aren't really that interested in money. It's not a hugely valuable resource to them. But let's just say that Country Rider has to constantly self-police themselves to ensure that their employees are good enough to meet the Mites standards in order to continue to functionally use the hub. If a single Country Rider employee was to fail at that, well, let's just say the Mites have their own little communication system, and it would very quickly get out that the Country Rider is no longer allowed to use the hub. This has actually happened in the past. Having this near constant usage of the hub means that just about any letter only has to travel at most, I think it's like 3 weeks to get to any destination. Which, if that doesn't sound impressive, then I don't even know what to tell you. Any letter or any package getting anywhere with 3 weeks as the maximum transit time in this kind of a setting? Keeping in mind that airships, which are a very new invention, aren't exactly used for this kind of purpose. Keeping in mind that the railway there's only one. There's the one railway that circles the country, so that's not really useful for this as well. So without Country Rider and the hub transit, the only real methods to getting a letter from A to B are getting on a horse or a wagon or whatever, some kind of drawn animal-driven carriage, or walking there. So that's pretty impressive. Now, let's see. There, the other interesting thing about country riders, the fees are relatively small. They exist, and there's no such thing. They actually go out of their way to not sell package deals, no pun intended, because you can't just say, "Well, I want free country rider shipping forever or for a year or whatever." No, you have to pay each time. That's part of how they actually make their money is by ensuring that no one gets any deals by bilking the system that way. They also they they kind of very, very large things to be transited, and this happens, usually require significant fees and significant effort. To use an example I mentioned earlier, if they want to ship a Magicite core engine from, say, the Glendon Wood area to the Holtberg area, from the Praxis yards over to the shipyards in Holtberg, they can't take that through the hub. The hub has a maximum limit on what can be taken through it, which is I've been kind of deliberately vague on many times, but suffice to say that's too much. So they would have to manually transport that. What is effectively what is that, like 500 miles or something like that? No, it's longer than that. That's closer to like 1,000 miles, isn't it? It's a decent distance. I'd have to figure it out. Point being, woo. For those kind of jobs, they usually contract ATS or and the Blue Sentinels in order to make sure that these large packages, these large caravans get there on time. They also have a regular system set up in addition to the hub, which basically, I want you to picture like here's the map and here's all the major cities, and then there's like a hub. They have a hub city for each province or district or region or whatever, which isn't the major city, which isn't the capital cities. And so it's kind of like an airline, actually. There is a constant route. There's a single caravan for each area that is literally continuously moving through it in a cycle in order to make sure maximum access to things. This isn't usually used for letters, although it can take letters as well. It is primarily there for packages, for goods and shipping and just care packages or whatever that are being sent through that area. And so because that's constantly going, you pretty much are guaranteed that every several days, every week or so actually, in any given area, it's going to be in a spot that is close to a hub or is close to someone other one of the cycles, so it can do this. And so you get the package to the hub, which goes to here, which goes to here, which goes to there. Bam, package delivered. The country rider takes their success rate of delivery very seriously. This is why they employ the Blue Sentinels whenever they have to. I'll be talking about them later, don't worry. No Mass Effect intention here, I swear to God. It might have been unconscious, I'll admit that, but it was not deliberate. Anyways, but yeah, they hire trained professional mercenaries to keep their stuff safe, and they usually take any threat to their services very, very seriously. Which again has come up in the campaign recently with regards to Coulson and the Holtberg region, and a certain general who was doing things he probably shouldn't have. Yeah. Like I said, let's segue this. So they use ATS occasionally for the really big jobs, like their caravans and their hub transit and their riders. They can't deal with the really big jobs. If we want to transport, I used an example. We want to transit a Magicite core all the way over to, across the country, we need to go to ATS, which is Archon Transport Systems. Now, Archon Transport Systems is a shipping company. That's pretty much all they handle. They are primarily on the ocean, but they also have airships. This is one of the very, very, very few organizations that actually has their own airships. And they have cargo airships, big old ones that are basically super transports, whose only purpose is to transport the really big stuff or very large supplies or groups of transport, or whatever, from point A to point B. They use caravans, they use Magicite ships, they use airships, and they use the railway. Not many people are aware of this, but even though the railway is technically owned by the Ostith, the ATS effectively own and run the railway. They're the ones who actually use it pretty much 90% of the time. ATS is ridiculously wealthy. A huge sum of money flows through ATS constantly because of the sheer cost involved in maintaining their fleets and the many things that is required to keep massive airships and massive Magicite trawlers and massive sailing ships and massive numbers of caravans going. And in addition to that, that makes them very expensive. So anyone using them has to be really pretty serious about getting these things transited. Now, you may be like, well, what's the difference between the Country Rider and the ATS? Well, the Country Rider is more about letters, packages. You know, if you want to buy something off of Amazon, that's probably coming through Country Rider. If you want to ship several entire trunks of tree trunks, you know, a whole I don't know what the term is, a group of tree trunks from this area, so you get this particular brand of wood, which only grows here, all the way up here, that would go through ATS. It's mostly a matter of scale. Also, as I mentioned, ATS almost universally goes by sea, if they can afford to. If they can't, they go by air. Their air fleet is actually really small. They only have 3 airships total. But that's effectively all they need. It only takes them... what would that be? I can't remember the calculation off the top. I've actually figured out the math on how long it takes to go from one place to another based on speeds, but within the week's range, less than a month, to cross the entire continent by airship, so that's pretty decent for the time. So they have pretty good availability when it comes to that. ATS also has pretty universally tried to avoid getting involved in political matters because that would obviously be pretty bad for their business. But, well, they're having trouble maintaining that lately since every frickin' buddy is at war with every frickin' buddy else. And most of the contracts ATS deals with is very large-scale stuff. The major organizations and the 4 nations. It's kind of hard to ostracize half your client base and still keep functioning as a company, so let's just say that ATS has been involved in the war, and we'll just leave it at that for now. They also have their own private army, the Blue Sentinels, whom I mentioned earlier. They are basically mercenaries, but for all intents and purposes, they are career mercenaries. These are career soldiers who are raised, or not raised, but trained and funded and recruited, and they're long-term benefits. They are encouraged to stay with the Sentinels and keep working for the ATS for some time. It is intended, like I said, to be a career, not just, I want to be a mercenary for a few years. They see a fairly large amount of action, keeping all the ATS stuff, and as I mentioned earlier, some of the Country Rider stuff safe from bandits, from harpies, from beasts, from centaurs, and God knows what else. Especially in the somewhat more dangerous areas. Especially anything transiting through Osteth usually has an entire, I guess that would be a platoon of Blue Sentinels defending like anything that goes through there, because if anything attacks, that entire platoon will be needed to either kill it or push it back. So for obvious reasons, nobody really likes sending stuff around in the Osteth region if they can avoid it. What else we got? ATS headquarters is in Hebiento. Oh, speaking of which, Country Rider headquarters is in Holtberg. I forgot to mention that earlier. Let's talk about XDY, Zelios Drive Yards. Now, Zelios Drive Yards are basically the go-to guys for constructing ships. For the most part, this is actually purely the Magicite ships and airships. Pretty much, I would say 99.9% of all airships that are commercial, that are private, that are not military-grade airships, are produced by XDY. Zelios is the go-to people for that. They are actually founded and based in Lynn, which is an Osteth city, but they also have facilities for construction in Glendon Wood, as I already mentioned earlier, and in Quall. They don't just build airships or Magicite ships. They also produce parts for repairs or for replacement, and they sell their services. Mechanics from XDY are actually fairly common to be hired out on long-term contracts on a given ship that either doesn't have the expertise or doesn't want to get the expertise or can't afford the expertise otherwise in order to get someone to keep the ship running. Basic engineer maintenance kind of a thing. Ironically, I don't actually have much else to say about XDY except for the method by which they operate, which is to say they don't really have standard models. They have yet to actually construct a standard template or class or whatever you want to call it of airship. Any given airship is actually constructed to specification. So, if you go there and you happen to have the ridiculous amount of wealth and standing necessary to say, I want to buy an airship, you get to decide what kind of airship you want and how it functions and what it looks like and basically everything. Now, that being said, XDY is basically undergun, for lack of a nicer way to put it, from Alluvia in particular, but also from the Osteth Republic and tangentially from the Confederacy and the Empire as well. that they have limitations, basically. You can't, in other words, if you go to XDY and you want to buy a military grade airship, they're probably going to say no. It is worth noting that that does not mean it is impossible to purchase a military-grade airship from XDY. It just means you cannot legally purchase a military-grade airship from XDY. It's also going to cost you through the nose, keeping in mind that an airship in general is also a ludicrously expensive thing. I can't even think of a real... Well, actually, I guess the real-world equivalent to trying to get your own airship would be kind of like, I want a functioning ship that can go into space and make a landing again. We have those, and they're semi-common, and they exist in several nations, and we know about them, and they're stupidly expensive, so, you know. Naturally, there are actually a fairly decent number of airships that are basically cars, in terms of size and function. A personal transport for one to four people, and that's it. Those airships are way cheaper, obviously, and a lot more common for the wealthy to have here or there. Those types of airships also generally have no real combat capacities whatsoever, or any of the fancy doohickeys that the military-grade ones do. XDY... Actually, I don't think I want to share that yet, do I? There's one other thing about XDY, but we won't talk about that. The PTC. Now, this is definitely a company that has been on the front page, on the camera, so to speak, for the campaign several times. The Provincial Trading Company. The PTC... Well, this is kind of a cheat, but they're basically the East India Trading Company for Primus. Now, that is a huge that's a huge simplification. There's a lot more complexity to it, but that is you know, if everyone's like, well, who's the PTC, and I don't want to give them an hour response or even the shorter response I'm giving you guys, that's what I say. Oh, they're the East India Trading Company. They employ what are effectively thugs. Now, there's reasons for this, but they will basically hire you as long as you can carry a weapon and bash someone's head in as their private military force for all intents and purposes. That is an organization called the IGA, or the Investigation and General Affairs Company. Like I said, the IGA are thugs. However, they are not. They're like the exact opposite of the Blue Sentinels. They're there just to be able to guard shipments and stores and warehouses and that kind of a thing. That being said, the IGA is not just, we want to hire people with low moral standards. The PTC hires people into the IGA partially as a movement that has been going on for years and years and years, decades at this point, to try and keep people out of banditry. People who would ordinarily be inclined to become a bandit because they don't have a lot of skill set, because they don't have the money to get themselves schooling, because they don't have the financial or political backing to get themselves into a decent position, those people would probably turn to crime. They would become bandits or raiders or whatever. The PTC offers these people a job, a legitimate, honest job, you know, doing hard work and being able to protect against other people in order to prevent them from being part of the problem. It's kind of similar to a thing that happens in real life where a lot of times hackers, you know, genuine computer hackers, will be hired to be counter hackers, to be white hats, right? So that's kind of the situation with the IGA. I'll talk a little bit more about the IGA in just a second because it's kind of a separate organization, but let's get back to the PTC. So what does the PTC actually do? They're primarily manufacturing and trade. They have what is effectively the largest share of produced goods in the continent. I would compare them to Walmart if Walmart was bigger, basically. So just about any household in any of the 5 nations, yes, 5 nations, probably has PTC goods in there somewhere. And I'm talking everyday stuff. You know, desks, chairs, containers, food. This is the kind of stuff that PTC produces and ships regularly. And I stress that food one. They have a fairly large number of rather lucrative contracts, thanks to some meddling and maneuvering within Alluvia, to have basically exclusive access to a large portion of the produce that Eastham manages to control, to push out. And so they then ship that and sell that to the rest of the continent and make a fairly large sum of money on it. The PTC is what I like to think of as one of the the more down-to-earth companies, organizations of these I've listed. You know, you have the towering ATS and the monumental Praxis and the omnipresent Country Rider, and then there's the PTC, which technically is stronger and wealthier in terms of political affluence, actual currency, and general sway than any of these other corporations, any of these other organizations. But they don't act like it. They're just like these guys who do what they do. It is also worth noting the PTC does not. Well, let's just say that the PTC is surprisingly well organized. I think that's probably the best way to put it for something that is as sprawling and as influential as it is. The other thing about the PTC though is they almost universally don't deal with weaving. They don't like to actually employ weavers. Weavers are expensive and rare, and if you paid attention somewhere, I feel like I've mentioned this. Maybe I haven't mentioned this yet. Weavers basically have a finite amount of weaving they can do. I know I've mentioned this somewhere. This is actually represented as a game mechanic and a lore mechanic. Basically, you will reach a point where you cannot weave anymore, unless it's something so mundane you can't deal with it. I know I've talked about this at least somewhere. And so weavers tend to be expensive, and the PTC just says, no, we're not even dealing with that. So they hire, you know, blacksmiths and carpenters and tailors and weavers, that kind of thing, you know, regular weavers. That's the clientele that they tend to hire to produce their goods. In other words, the PTC are the mundane manufacturers and traders and shippers for basically everyone. They're also the kind of company that, ironically, any group of adventurers would probably almost never interact with, because adventurers, by their default, are basically part of the elite. The PTC primarily deals with the mundane, the normal. This is funny because the PTC, again, has been involved in the party's interactions several times, although mostly as someone who is a victim of something else. There's actually still an outstanding plot thread involving the PTC and the live campaign, which I hope they will resolve sometime soon. So let's talk about the IGA. Now, the IGA has a terrible reputation. Most of that is, well, it's about 50 earned and 50 not. Like I said, a lot of the IGA's purpose is not just to hire people who are willing to, you know, be thugs, be the private enforcers for some kind of criminal underpin king thing, whatever. They are there to give these people a job. And there are plenty of IGA members who are legitimate, who are decent, honest workers. They also have a group of IGA who don't actually have any term. So I don't have a term to give you for these guys. My internal thing, what I tend to refer to them as the elite, because it's a simple moniker. The elite IGA are people who are career IGA, kind of like the Blue Sentinels, basically. People who tend to train other IGA members, people who tend to be more professional, better presented. They know how to be diplomatic. They know how to talk to people rather than just saying, sod off. You know, they actually will say, I'm sorry, sir, you're not allowed to enter this area. Is there anything else I can help you with? You know, they will actually have a modicum of decorum. These elite tend to be specifically in certain areas and be involved in certain parts where either the PTC has recently moved into, and so it's like, hey, look, you know, we want to show how good we can be, or in areas that are very important to maintain good public relations. And the party has actually interacted with 2 areas like that so far. The other interesting thing about the IGA, though, is they're seemingly non-picky about recruits. I mean, you could literally walk up and say, I want to join the IGA, and they'll say, done. There's no filtering process to join. But there actually is. There's a fleecing process. You actually have to go through basically what is effectively a tour of being a guard, and you'll almost always be put into some place that is a trouble area right off the bat. Now, you will have elites with you, at least one elite to a squad, whose entire purpose is to make sure that you guys stay alive and you're taken care of. But while you are there, you'll be given very basic training, very basic equipment, very basic rations, etc., and they will basically see how you do in action. If you're trying to infiltrate, or if you're trying to just be a layabout, or if you're a low-time thug who just wanted to be able to bash someone's head or whatever. And this way they fleece people out, and the elites will write reports and say, okay, this guy did this and this guy did this, and those reports will go to the central office, which will then redistribute these people based on recommendations. That's also one of the catches with joining the IGA. Unless you're damned good, you're basically required to move whenever they want you to, wherever they want you to. Which brings me to another interesting point about both the PTC and the IGA. Both of these are integrally tied into the Eluvian kingdom, thanks to the High Queen Alyssa. She has a long-standing interest in the PTC, and it's interesting because lately the PTC has been very prevalent in conquered Navarre territories, in the areas around Iraq and Tufa, specifically to try and culturally acclimate these citizens to being Eluvian citizens by showing them, the benefits of being an Eluvian citizen. So they've been getting a lot of priority, and the PTC has basically been taking a loss, ensuring that all their best goods and their best troops and their best people are there in those conquered territories to shine a nice face into things, so people will be, amicable or amiable. Whether that's insidious or evil or whatnot is up to you to decide. Anyways, let's talk about... We already talked about... so Praxis. Praxis Industrial. Praxis is pretty much the biggest weaving company that there is. Most major weavers the party has encountered have, at least at some point in their lives, been an employee of Praxis. Millie of Great Gear, a gnome woman who has encountered the party several times now, was an ex-employee of Praxis, while also being an ex-employee of the Undermarket. Praxis, I kind of already actually explained everything about it. Praxis is all about weaving. You want something woven, there's a pretty good chance you're going to be going through them. Now, that being said, as I've tried to explain, Primus has the tiering system. Okay, now, to explain what I mean a little bit, because I don't think I've really gone into this. Here's like all of the goods, all of the equipment, all the whatnot in the continent, right? Now, just the continent, I want to stress that, because there's more of the world out there. There's also just the civilized continent, because there's this and this. Anyways, so in this area, like 90% of it is all Tier 1 stuff. Low-grade equipment that most people use on an everyday basis. Stuff that would be vendor trash to a group of adventurers, unless they were level 1, in which case it would be all they have, right? So that's the majority. Then there's Tier 2, which is your basic adventuring gear, which is better than that and much rarer and much harder to come by. And then there's Tier 3, which is even smaller. We're talking like we're at the 2% range at this point, and so forth and so on. It's, in other words, it's trying to explain why... See, for example, in Faerun, adventuring gear plus 2 swords, that kind of stuff, is relatively common, if incredibly expensive. I've actually analyzed the economics and the economy of Faerun, and it tilts all on adventuring. Huge, ridiculous sums of money are cycled around through the system by adventurers, because of adventurers. It is an adventurer-based economy. With me? So, that works for them, but it only works because adventurers are constantly pushing that huge amount of money into and out of the system, right? In Primus, there is no such thing. The adventurers are on their way out. The Adventurers Guild has shut down as of now. There is no frontier anymore that anyone really has access to, although at least one of the party members is trying to expand that and reintroduce the frontier into things, because there actually are still frontiers out there. It's just they're pretty bad. The Crater area and the Dyers, specifically. But the point is, adventurers, they've gone out of fashion. There's mercenary groups and nations and militaries and otherwise more mundane ways of dealing with this stuff now. So the economy of Primus tilts on other things. This is why, in Faerun, there's much more accessibility of the Tier 2 and the Tier 3 and the Tier 4 equipment. In Primus, it's almost nothing. I bring this up with regards to Praxis because Praxis is pretty much the ones responsible for producing all of that up to about Tier 2. So all that Tier 1 gear, that +1 sword or that umbrella that somehow manages to repel rain in an area around it and makes you a little bit warmer while you're in it, relatively mundane magical items like that, that's what Praxis makes. And they do it pretty much all over the place. And even that stuff is pretty expensive. That umbrella I mentioned earlier, a normal person would probably have to save up for like a month of wages to be able to afford that umbrella. But then it's then it's good for years. So I mean, you see the trade-off here. Praxis doesn't really deal with the high-level stuff because there is no high-level stuff. Anyone who can make the really good stuff, the stuff that's equivalent level for adventurers, is either an individual who is either retired or has moved on, or is a special exception. And it's designed that way on purpose. And again, I remind you, weavers have a finite amount of weaving they can do. So any given person who works for Praxis is doing so knowing that at a certain point in their career, they'll have to stop. They'll only be able to make really, really mundane stuff And at that point, they'll basically be demoted to a new position. And that's how Praxis operates, by the way. You join Praxis, and they've got their own tier system, and basically most people just make mundane stuff. If they get any really good weavers, those people usually make good stuff and good stuff and good stuff until the specific orders stop coming in, and then they're offered a choice. We'll give you a little bit less salary than you've been getting in order to keep making the mundane stuff, so we could keep getting, those umbrellas being constructed. I'm using umbrellas as an example to give you an idea of a common magical item. Or you can take an early retirement. We'll give you a small sum of money, and we'll say, have a nice day. Most people take the former option. Not everyone, though. So that's Praxis. Now, there's this other organization called the Sun. I'm pretty sure the Sun doesn't exist. I keep hearing about it in rumors and whatnot, and the party keeps hearing about this organization called the Sun, and I think they're just making stuff up. I don't know what that is. Then there's the Undermarket. Now, I've mentioned the Undermarket many, many times, but I've never really talked about what the Undermarket was, per se. The Undermarket was the term is almost literal. The Undermarket was the foundation of the economy of the world. Or I should say of the continent. It was the criminal side of things, the illegal side of things. But when I say that, I don't mean that as you're probably thinking it. These were not, gangsters or mafia dons or whatever. These were people who were simply doing illegal trades. In fact, it would be more accurate to call the Undermarket a organization of Han Solos, rather than an organization of Jabba the Hutts, if you understand the difference. Both are illegal. Both are wanted by the organizations involved, but one of them is doing stuff that is just kind of skirting the lines of ethics and morality, and the other one is flat out being an evil bastard. There are actual criminal organizations, like the one I mentioned earlier in the show region, but that's not the Undermarket. The Undermarket's purpose was to keep the economy running by allowing the governments to pass whatever laws they wanted to, and ensuring that the flow of goods and currency continued regardless of the countries that passed laws. The premise there was literally, people are always going to make stupid laws and stupid organizations, and that's all temporary. Laws change. What is a constant is the need, the sentient, sapient need for goods, for services. So that's what the Undermarket is here for, to be a constant supplier of goods and services for the entire continent, regardless of legality. This also means, if you're paying attention, the Undermarket has actually been fully legal for certain periods of its history. The Undermarket's also been around for a really long time. In fact, this is a little bit of a spoiler, but the Undermarket was founded right around year 0. So yeah, it's been around for longer than most of the nations have been. The Undermarket is, of course, gone now. It has been assassinated by someone who was capable of infiltrating it at basically every level across the entire continent, which I want to re-stress that because that's insane that they managed to do that. They managed to put agents into every single group of the Undermarket across an entire continent. Imagine having groups of assassins in every city in an entire country, and you have an idea of what was required to make this happen. And then they took them out. Took out the leadership and the organizers, the middlers, as it's actually referred to, of the Undermarket, which kind of made the entire Undermarket collapse utterly. Certain organizations are trying to rebuild the Undermarket, including the Noveria Raiders, run by a bandoling whose name I can't think of right now, and the Exchange, run by Zeiss and Coulson. Curious to see how that one's going to work out. Then there's the Dragonkin Sworn. Now, these are probably the most elite mercenaries in the world. There's not actually that many of them, and they are 100% dragoons. One of the requirements for joining the Dragonkin Sworn is be a dragoon. So you can already imagine how incredibly rare it is to have anyone join the Dragonkin Sworn. These are people who are some of the highest level characters in the entire country. I'm pretty sure, I actually worked this out at one point, but basically they have around 100 members total. That's it, that's all. The Sworn also try to conduct themselves according to a very strict rule of guidelines and conduct. It's mostly about, what you would expect, honor, decency, etc. There's a few other things in there that the party hasn't really interacted with that has to do with the way they deal with political situations, and they tend to place more emphasis on accomplishing a mission objective rather than helping someone else out, and this has caused some issues in the past, and some people have left the Dragonkin Sworn over this. But they are ultimately more about the professional outlook. they're not here to do good, they're here to be professionals. And that does mean ethics get to take a backseat at some points. That being said, if you hired the Dragonkin Sworn to wipe out a town, they're going to say no. But if you hire the Dragonkin Sworn to defend a caravan and a nearby town is attacked, they will probably ignore that town because they're here to do a job. See the difference? Now, they are kind of hated and loved simultaneously by the public as a whole, and especially the nations, the governments of the various nations. They are also ridiculously expensive. No one out there is more expensive to hire than the Dragonkin Sworn. So any given time you see one of them around, you know that whoever hired them means business. I already mentioned the Blue Sentinels. I don't really have anything else to say about the Blue Sentinels. They are not even an organization of themselves, kind of like the IGA is. They are basically just career mercs working for ATS, who are occasionally hired out to Country Rider. The Bloodied Flock. This one's a fun one. The Bloodied Flock are legal assassins. The way it works is during the Daracost Accords, it was decided that, okay, people are going to hire people to kill other people. Why don't we at least keep it nice and controlled? So the governments all agreed to ratify the Bloodied Flock legally amongst the four nations, including the fledgling Kingdom of Alluvia. The way it works is any given assassin has to adhere to a very strict set of rules to be a part of the flock. If you fail at any of these rules, they will either kick you out or, depending on severity, kill you. And they will actually, in some cases, hand you over to the people who you have wronged by violating those rules to try and save face. The Bloodied Flock tries very, very hard to maintain their public image. So they have this whole system of legitimate killing. Basically, any given assassination job they are given has to go through a fairly large amount of paperwork to verify that, okay, you are legally going to be capable of killing this person for these legal reasons, etc., etc. And then the assassination is carried out, and any given Bloodied Flock member is actually required to report the assassination. You sneak into someone's house in the middle of the night and they're dead. You then have to walk out into the night, find a guard or a soldier, and say, okay, I am with the flock. I just murdered this man in his house or this woman in her house. Here's my writ. And they're all given a little writ which has various magical seals built into it so that they know it's legitimate. It's possible to fake those. It is very difficult. It's generally not considered worth it unless you have some reason to do so, of course. But yeah, so the guards are like, okay, well, carry on. There's actually a lot of complexity involved in procuring an assassination, in order to hiring the flock to assassinate someone. And like I said, there's a lot of paperwork involved. They don't do as much business as you might think. But at the same time, they do regular business. Assassinations are a regular thing. It is not uncommon in any given year for any given city to have at least one assassination in it. Usually more for the larger cities, and for the huge metropolises like Holtberg, people die all the time to the flock, to these legitimate killings. One of the requirements for the flock is certain types of people, certain organizations, certain positions, I should say more accurately, are basically off limits. You cannot take out the head of any major nationwide organization. You cannot go after certain heads of state in any of the four nations, that kind of a thing. You can't go over anyone of the Order. The Order is completely off limits for assassinations. And you can't go after, like for example, any assassination against an Olthoi is automatically no. But there's a fairly large set of rules, and I've never actually bothered to write them down because it's all up here. It all has to do with the myriad complexities that exist in the culture and society of this world. So basically, if a player came to me and says, I want to assassinate this guy, I would have to decide based on that individual guy, yes or no. With me? I think that's all the major organizations we're talking about. Looking at my notes here. I mean, there are, like I said, other major organizations. I suppose I'll talk about the Reds here, because those haven't gotten a lot of screen time, but they're pretty relevant. I've made a distinction in setting between bandits and pirates. Bandits in settings are people who steal. In general, if you're a bandit and you're caught, well, that sucks, but you might do some time, or you might be press-ganged into military or hard work service, but that's it, really. If you are a pirate and you are caught, you are killed. See, the distinction is bandits are people who steal from other people, and occasionally, mug other people. A pirate is someone who is basically a pirate in real life, and everything that all that horribleness implies, minus the rape, because that doesn't exist in my setting. Don't look at me like that. It doesn't. Um, so pirates are terrible people. They kill, they butcher, they massacre. They're the kind of people who will burn a town to the ground after stealing it dry just to make sure there's no witnesses. As you might imagine, pirates are universally hated. The nations have gone very far away to very extreme methods to basically try to stomp out all piracy. It has gotten pretty good, especially in the modern era with the advent of the airship. Piracy just isn't the same thing as it used to be. There's only one actual pirate organization left. Those are the Reds. The Reds are led by what? Well, actually, nobody knows who actually leads the Reds. They assume it's a guy named Red, because occasionally such a person will be mentioned. But the pirates are, or excuse me, the Reds are extremely well funded and surprisingly well equipped and very well motivated, and they're willing to do basically anything in order to accomplish their goals. Very recently, the Reds actually made an attempt to literally conquer a chunk of the Osteth Republic and hold it in order to make a claim at legitimacy as a new nation. Let me say that again. These pirates were sufficiently well armed and prepared and had access to military-grade airships, by the way, to actually try and conquer a chunk of the Republic. And they might not have succeeded. It's kind of a dice roll, but it is, without the intervention of the party, they would have had a very, very high chance of succeeding at that task, and then we would have had the nation of the Reds sitting around the, I guess that would be the Tau area. That would have been fun. I guess I can't actually share much else about the Reds, because not much else is actually known about the Reds. So I guess that's more or less everyone. I hope you've enjoyed this. As always, feel free to leave comments, questions, thoughts. I try to keep track of these, and if you have any further questions for future concernings, please feel free to share them. See you next time, guys.